The salt-scoured wind carried the ghosts of better men. Elias Vance felt them in the chill that settled deep in his bones, a cold that no amount of cheap whiskey could burn away. He sat on the splintered porch of his inherited ruin, a cabin clinging to a forgotten stretch of coastline, and watched the gray Atlantic chew at the shore. Beside him, a silent sentinel, sat the German shepherd. The dog had appeared months ago, a stray with old eyes and a soul that seemed to mirror the hollowed-out space in Elias's own chest. He'd named him Shep, a simple name for a creature of profound, unspoken complexity. To anyone else, the scene was one of desolate decay. A broken man and his dog watching over a collapsed boat shed, its roofline a jagged black scar against the bruised twilight sky. But Shep knew better. The dog's unwavering, nightly vigil over the derelict structure wasn't just instinct. It was a guard duty over a secret buried beneath the rot and rust. A $200 million secret born from genius and betrayal. A secret that had already cost one good man his life and was poised to get Elias killed next. If you believe in the quiet power of loyalty and the long road to redemption, please support our channel by subscribing. We're honored to share these stories with you, and we'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? The dog was the only anchor Elias had in a world that had come untethered. The days bled together, a monochrome smear of memory and regret. Mornings were for the headache, the thick, syrupy fog of another night spent wrestling the ghosts of Kandahar. Afternoons were for staring at the sea, its vast, indifferent surface a canvas onto which he projected the faces of his fallen team, most vividly that of Liam, his best friend, whose laughter he could still sometimes hear on the wind before it was snatched away by the shriek of gulls. The nights were for the bottle. It was a pathetic, grinding routine, and he knew it. He had been a Navy SEAL, a man forged in discipline and purpose, a weapon honed to a razor's edge. Now, that weapon was rusted, pitted with the corrosion of guilt. The ambush had been clean, efficient, and utterly devastating. Bad intelligence, they'd said. A tragic miscalculation. But Elias, the sole survivor, had felt the cold, deliberate precision of it. It wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. The thought was a cancer, eating at him from the inside, but with no proof it was just another demon to drink into submission. Shep had disrupted the routine. He'd wandered out of the coastal fog one evening, gaunt but proud, and simply sat on the porch, as if he'd been expected. He never barked, never begged. He just was. And slowly he began to intervene. When Elias's hand would reach for the bottle after the sun had dipped below the horizon, a wet nose would nudge it away. A heavy paw would land on his knee, and the dog's amber eyes would fix on him, not with judgment, but with a deep, knowing patience. It was infuriating. It was humbling. It was impossibly working. The dog was a silent, furry confessor, a steadfast presence that demanded nothing and yet somehow demanded everything. He demanded that Elias remain present, that he not completely surrender to the undertow of his grief. One evening the ritual changed. Shep, instead of settling by the porch chair, stood at the edge of the overgrown yard, his gaze locked on the dilapidated boat shed. A low whine, the first sound Elias had heard him make in weeks, rumbled in his chest. The shed was a part of the property he'd inherited from a great-uncle he'd never met. It was a testament to neglect, its wood gray and splitting, its tin roof peeling back like a sardine can. Elias had never gone near it. It was just more decay, a physical manifestation of the ruin he felt inside. But Shep was insistent. He trotted to the shed's sagging door and back again, his head low, his tail giving a single, urgent thump against his flank. The whine grew more insistent. "There's nothing there, boy," Elias rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Just rats and rot." Shep ignored him. He nudged the door with his nose, the wood groaning in protest. He looked back at Elias, a clear and undeniable summons in his eyes. For days this became their new dance. The dog would forsake his post by the whiskey bottle to stand guard at the shed, a silent, imploring statue. The nightly vigil was no longer about stopping Elias from drinking himself into oblivion. It was about pushing him toward something else. Elias felt a flicker of irritation, then a slow-burning curiosity. The dog's focus was too intense, too specific, to be random. It was the same pinpoint focus Elias had once applied to a mission plan, the kind of concentration that ignored all distractions in favor of the objective. Finally, worn down by the dog's persistence and a desperate need for something, anything, to break the monotony, Elias grabbed a crowbar from his truck. "Fine," he grumbled, the word a cloud of vapor in the crisp evening air. "Fine. Let's see what's got you so worked up." The hinges screamed as he pried the door open, releasing a dusty, musty breath of forgotten years. Inside, shrouded in cobwebs and bathed in the weak light filtering through grimy windows, was the skeletal frame of a boat. It was a wooden sailboat, maybe 35 feet, its hull half-planked, its ribs exposed like the carcass of some great beast. Tools lay scattered where they had been dropped, covered in a thick blanket of dust. It was a project abandoned mid-thought. Shep padded inside, his nails clicking on the concrete floor, and went straight to the stern of the boat, sniffing at the floorboards beneath it. Elias stood in the doorway, the crowbar heavy in his hand, and felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. The first tentative stirring of a purpose not tied to destruction. The decision to work on the boat wasn't a conscious one. It was more like a surrender. The emptiness of his days had become a pressure cooker, and the shed offered a release valve. He started by simply cleaning. He swept away the thick carpets of dust, the dead leaves that had blown in through the broken windows, and the mummified remains of long-dead rodents. The physical labor was a balm. It was honest. Sweat was real. Aching muscles were a clear and present sensation, not the phantom pains of memory. With every shovelful of debris he cleared, it felt as though he were clearing a small, cluttered corner of his own mind. Shep was his constant shadow, a silent foreman observing the work. The dog would lie in a patch of sunlight, his head on his paws, but his eyes followed Elias's every move. He seemed to approve. Once the floor was clear, the boat itself became the focus. Elias ran a hand over the unfinished hull. It was mahogany, he realized, its rich, red-brown grain hidden beneath a film of gray grime. The craftsmanship was exquisite. The ribs were perfectly joined, the lines of the hull graceful and swift even in its skeletal state. Whoever had started this boat had been a master. He found a stack of lumber, carefully stored and protected from the worst of the damp. There were plans, too, rolled up in a dusty canvas tube. He unrolled them on a makeshift workbench. "The Wanderer," read the elegant script at the top of the page. The designs were detailed, precise, a love letter written in ink and paper. For the first time since he'd left the service, Elias felt a flicker of the man he used to be. A mission had presented itself. It was small, contained, and pointless in the grand scheme of things, but it was his. He would finish this boat. He would restore what had been abandoned. He drove into the small coastal town of Port Blossom for supplies, the trip an exercise in social anxiety. The town was a collection of salt-bleached buildings huddled around a working harbor. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and a stranger was an immediate object of curiosity. At the hardware store, a bell above the door announcing his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt entirely out of place with his mood. He gathered sandpaper, marine varnish, and wood glue. The woman behind the counter, her name tag identifying her as Mary, had kind, crinkling eyes and a cloud of white hair. "Haven't seen you around before," she said, her voice warm. "Just moved into the old Pendleton place," Elias mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Mary's smile widened. "Arthur's place. Lord, that man loved that boat of his. A shame he never got to finish it. He was a brilliant man, Arthur Pendleton. A bit of a recluse toward the end, but brilliant, the name resonated. Arthur Pendleton, the signature on the boat plans. Back at the shed, as Elias began the painstaking process of sanding the first plank, Shep became agitated again. He left his sunny spot and began nudging at Elias's leg, whining softly. When Elias didn't respond, the dog walked over to the stern of the Wanderer and began pawing insistently at a single floorboard, the same spot he had been drawn to on the first day. The scratching sound was sharp, deliberate. "What is it, boy?" Elias asked. Shep looked at him, then back at the board, and let out a single sharp bark. It was a command. Elias set down his sandpaper. He knelt, examining the floor. The board looked no different from the others, but as he ran his fingers along the edges, he felt it. A slight give. A seam that wasn't quite flush. He retrieved the crowbar. With a grunt of effort, he wedged the tip into the seam and pried. The wood groaned, then popped loose. Beneath it was not dirt and concrete, but a hollow space. And nestled inside that space, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, heavy, steel box. It was about the size of a shoebox, its surface cold and seamless except for a complex-looking circular lock on its face. There was no keyhole. The lock was a puzzle, a series of concentric rings etched with symbols, not letters or numbers, but strange, geometric shapes. It looked like something from a spy movie, and it brought a jolt of unwelcome familiarity. This was the kind of device his team had encountered on operations, designed to be uncrackable without a specific esoteric key. Elias carried the box back to his cabin and set it on the kitchen table, the weight of it a solid, tangible mystery. Shep sat at his feet, watching him, the low thump of his tail against the floorboards a steady rhythm of encouragement. For 2 days the boat was forgotten. Elias's world shrank to the surface of the box. His mind, so long mired in the fog of grief, sharpened. He recognized the logic of it. It wasn't about force. It was about sequence, about understanding the mind of the man who built it. Arthur Pendleton, the recluse, the master boat builder, the brilliant engineer. He retrieved the boat plans, spreading them out beside the box. He studied the lines, the measurements, the annotations written in a neat, precise hand. He was looking for a pattern, a clue, a cipher hidden in plain sight. His training kicked in. He began to think not like a grieving veteran, but like a tactical analyst. Deconstruct the problem. Identify the variables. Find the logic system. The symbols on the lock were unique, but some of them mirrored the maritime symbols used on old nautical charts. He cross-referenced them with a book he found in the cabin, an old almanac filled with star charts and tide tables. It was a slow, frustrating process. He'd align the rings, try a combination based on a constellation or a series of tide markers, and fail. The box remained stubbornly sealed. He felt the old frustration, the kind that came before a breach, the tension of a puzzle that held lives in the balance. Except this time it was just a box. But it felt like more. Felt like a test. On the 3rd night, staring at the schematics for the Wanderer, he saw it. In the detailed drawing of the boat's keel, there was a series of small, seemingly random measurements noted in the margin. They didn't correspond to any physical part of the boat. They were just numbers: 337, 142, 281. He looked back at the almanac. They were coordinates, not for a place on a map, but for stars. 3 specific stars in the Draco constellation. He returned to the lock, aligning the symbols that corresponded to those stars. With a soft, satisfying click, the mechanism disengaged. The lid sprung open a fraction of an inch. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He felt a surge of triumph, clean and pure. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were 2 items: a thick, leather-bound journal and a collection of rolled schematics, far more complex than the ones for the boat. He opened the journal. The first page was dated 50 years prior. "My work is finally complete," it began, the handwriting the same as on the boat plans. "I have done it. A silent, magneto-hydrodynamic drive. A propulsion system with no moving parts, undetectable by any current sonar. A revolution, but I fear it. In the wrong hands, it is not a tool of exploration, but a weapon of silent, unseen death. I have been approached by men from Argent Defense. Vultures in suits. They want to steal it, to weaponize it. I will not let them. I will hide it. I will build my escape, the Wanderer, and I will disappear. The work dies with me, if it must." Elias's hands trembled as he read. Argent Defense. A rival of Aegis Dynamics, the contractor from his own past. He unrolled the other schematics. They were dense, brilliant, filled with calculations that were beyond his understanding but whose purpose was terrifyingly clear. Arthur Pendleton hadn't just been building a boat. He had invented something that could change the nature of naval warfare. This wasn't just a hobbyist's forgotten project. It was a legacy, a dangerous one. The first twist of the key had opened the box. The second had just unlocked a history of corporate espionage and a technology worth a fortune. The boat shed was no longer just a place for therapeutic labor. It was the vault for a $200 million secret. And Elias, by virtue of a stray dog's intuition, was now its sole guardian. His mission had just solidified, its scope expanding exponentially. He wasn't just finishing a boat. He was protecting Arthur Pendleton's life's work from the very vultures the old man had feared. The discovery changed the texture of the work. The restoration of the Wanderer was no longer just a way to pass the time. It became an act of preservation, a tribute to the man who had conceived of it. Elias felt a kinship with Arthur Pendleton, another man who had sought refuge from a world of predators. The shed became a sanctuary, but now it was a sanctuary with a purpose. Each plank he sanded and fitted to the hull felt like a promise he was keeping. The scent of cedar and mahogany dust filled the air, a clean, earthy smell that pushed back against the stale odor of old grief. He worked with a focus he hadn't known he still possessed. His hands, once trained to handle weapons with lethal precision, learned the gentle art of persuasion, coaxing the wood into shape, sealing the seams, bringing the dead frame back to life. The physical exertion left him exhausted but clear-headed. The nightmares of the ambush in Kandahar began to fade, replaced by dreams of open water and billowing sails. He was building something, not destroying it. He was creating, not just surviving. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible day by day, but it was real. One afternoon, while planing a section of the deck, he caught his reflection in a shard of broken window glass. The man looking back was leaner, his eyes clearer, the slackness of despair in his face replaced by a taut, weathered resolve. His trips into Port Blossom became more frequent. He needed specialized fasteners, marine-grade epoxy, and sailcloth. He found himself in conversation with Mary at the hardware store more often. She was a gentle source of local history, a wellspring of information about the town and its people. Arthur was a good man, she told him one day, while ringing up a can of copper-based paint. Came here after his wife passed. Bought that land and kept to himself. Said the world had gotten too loud. He was always tinkering, always building. People thought he was strange, but I thought he was just sad, like he was trying to build a fortress against a bad memory. The words struck a chord deep within Elias. A fortress against a bad memory. That's what this shed, this boat, had become for him. Mary's casual friendliness was a bridge back to a world he had forsaken. He started to learn the names of the fishermen down at the docks, offering a quiet nod that was, eventually, returned. He was still an outsider, the brooding hermit from the Pendleton place, but he was no longer a ghost. He was becoming a part of the landscape, a quiet fixture like the old lighthouse on the point. This re-engagement, however minimal, was a vulnerability. It meant he could be seen. It meant he was no longer invisible. One sun-drenched afternoon, a car far too expensive for the rutted dirt road, leading to his cabin crunched to a halt in his driveway. A man in a crisp, tailored suit stepped out, his polished shoes looking absurdly out of place against the weeds and gravel. He was handsome, with a salesman's practiced smile and cold, assessing eyes. "Elias Vance?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. Elias, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, simply nodded, his body tensing. Shep, who had been dozing on the porch, rose to his feet, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "Easy, boy," Elias said quietly, placing a hand on the dog's back. The man's smile didn't falter. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a hand that Elias made no move to take. "I'm a principal with the Thorne Development Group. I've had my eye on this stretch of coastline for some time. It's magnificent." Thorne gestured vaguely at the sea. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for this property. All cash. Enough to set you up anywhere you'd like." far away from all this. He gave the dilapidated cabin a look of faint disgust. The offer was astronomical, far more than the land was worth. It was life-changing money. 2 years ago, Elias would have taken it in a heartbeat and drunk himself to death on a beach in Mexico. But now something had shifted. This land, this shed, this boat, they weren't just property anymore. They were his recovery. They were Arthur Pendleton's legacy. "It's not for sale," Elias said, his voice flat and final. Thorne's smile tightened at the edges. "Mr. Vance, perhaps you don't understand. I'm offering you a fresh start." "I'm not looking for one," Elias replied, his gaze unwavering. "I like the one I'm building right here." For a moment, the mask of civility slipped, and Elias saw the predator beneath. Thorne's eyes swept over the property, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the boat shed. It was a flicker of interest so quick Elias might have missed it if he hadn't spent 2 decades reading men in high-stakes environments. Thorne's interest wasn't in the coastline. It was in the shed. He knew. Somehow he knew. "A pity," Thorne said, his smile returning cold and empty. "I rarely take no for an answer. Think about it. My offer stands." He slid a business card onto the porch railing, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a palpable sense of menace in his wake. Elias picked up the card. Thorne Development Group, it read, with a sleek, stylized T as the logo. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The vultures Arthur had written about had finally found their way back to the nest. The rejection of Thorne's offer was a declaration of war, and the first countersalvo came swiftly. A few days later, Elias went to drive into town and found all 4 tires on his old pickup truck slashed, the rubber gaping open in vicious smiles. There was no note, no sign of the perpetrator, just the silent, undeniable message: "I can get to you." It was a petty act of intimidation, but it was effective. It stranded him. More importantly, it violated the sanctity of his refuge. He spent the day patching the tires, his anger a cold, simmering fire. The work on the boat became more urgent, fueled now by a new kind of energy. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about defiance. The next escalation came a week later. Elias was jolted from a deep sleep by a sound that cut through the night like a blade. Shep's furious, savage barking. It wasn't the dog's usual warning growl. This was a sound of pure protective rage. Elias was out of bed in an instant, grabbing the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. He moved silently through the cabin to the window that overlooked the boat shed. In the pale moonlight, he saw a dark figure jimmying the new lock he'd installed on the shed door. Before Elias could even move toward his own door, Shep launched himself from the porch, a black blur of muscle and teeth. The intruder, startled, scrambled backward, stumbling over a pile of lumber. The man hadn't anticipated a guard dog of Shep's size and ferocity. He threw a tool at the dog, which Shep easily dodged, and then fled into the darkness of the surrounding woods, the dog's barking chasing him away. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He called Shep back, his voice sharp with adrenaline. The dog returned, panting, his fur bristling. He hadn't been hurt. The shed was secure. But the message was clearer this time. "I can get to what you value." Thorne wasn't just after the land anymore. He was after the contents of the shed. He was testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. The peace Elias had so carefully constructed was shattering. The paranoia, the hypervigilance of his former life, came flooding back. He started sleeping in shifts, his senses on high alert for the slightest sound. He reinforced the doors and windows of the cabin and the shed, turning his sanctuary into a fortified position. The restoration work took on a grim, desperate edge. He had to finish the boat. He had to get Arthur's work and himself to safety. The idyllic rhythm of his new life was gone, replaced by the tense cadence of a siege. Then, Thorne delivered his masterstroke, a blow aimed directly at the heart of Elias's rebuilt world. One morning, Elias woke to silence. A deep, unnerving quiet. Shep wasn't at the foot of his bed. He wasn't on the porch. The dog's water bowl was full. His food was untouched. Elias called his name, his voice tight with rising panic. He circled the property, his calls growing more frantic. The woods, the beach, the road empty. Shep was gone. On the porch, right where the dog usually slept, was a single, pristine business card. The same one Thorn had left before. But this time there was nothing else. No note, no threat. Just the chilling, deafening absence of the one creature that had pulled him back from the brink. The message was the most brutal yet. I have taken what you love. Now give me what I want. The quiet suspense had ended. The war was now deeply, agonizingly personal. The disappearance of Shep ripped through the fragile peace Elias had built, exposing the raw, unhealed wound beneath. The grief for his lost friend, Liam, which had been scabbed over by routine and labor, was torn open anew, magnified by the fresh, acute terror of losing the dog. Shep wasn't just a pet. He was the catalyst, the quiet companion who had witnessed his slow crawl back toward the light. Losing him felt like losing a part of his own reclaimed soul. Panic gave way to a cold, familiar rage. This was Thorn's doing. It was a tactical move designed to break him, to make him compliant. But Thorn had miscalculated. He had mistaken Elias's quiet healing for weakness. He had poked the wrong bear. Elias's mind shifted, the gears grinding from craftsman back to operator. The search for Shep was no longer a frantic, emotional hunt. It became a mission. He started at the porch where the dog was taken. He scanned the ground, his eyes tracing the faint disturbances in the dirt, the scuff marks his untrained eye would have missed just months ago. He found what he was looking for near the edge of the woods. A single, deep boot print that didn't belong to him, and beside it, something small and metallic glinting in the morning sun. He picked it up. It was a Zippo lighter, heavy and customized. Engraved on its brushed chrome surface was a logo, a stylized eagle clutching a shield. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew that logo, Aegis Dynamics. The name was a ghost from his worst nightmare. Aegis Dynamics was the private military contractor that had provided the faulty intelligence for the operation in Kandahar. They were the ones who had pointed his team toward the ambush, the ones whose mistake had cost Liam his life. The connection was instantaneous and devastating. Couldn't be a coincidence. The world tilted on its axis. He stumbled back into the cabin, the lighter cold in his palm, and went straight for Arthur Pendleton's journal. He'd read it once, but now he scoured its pages with a new, desperate intensity, looking for a name, a link. And there it was, in an entry dated just months before Arthur had sealed his work away. The vultures from Argent are gone, Arthur had written. But a new predator has emerged, a young, ambitious executive from a rival firm, Aegis Dynamics. His name is Marcus Thorn. He is utterly ruthless. He doesn't want to buy my work. He wants to own it, to twist its purpose. He speaks of asymmetrical advantages and next-generation denial capabilities. He sees my dream of silent exploration only as a perfect weapon for assassination and covert insertion. I told him to go to hell. I fear he may try to send me there first. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Marcus Thorn. The slick developer was the same ruthless executive from Arthur's journal. Aegis Dynamics, the company behind Liam's death. It wasn't faulty intelligence. It was a lie. Cover. Elias's mind raced, connecting the disparate points across the years. What if Thorn had been trying to acquire Pendleton's technology back then? What if Liam's SEAL team, known for their maritime expertise, had gotten in the way? Perhaps they had stumbled onto Thorn's illegal attempts to secure the drive, or were operating in an area where Thorn was conducting a secret, off-the-books test. The ambush wasn't a tragic consequence of war. It was a corporate assassination disguised as a combat engagement. Thorn had eliminated a potential threat to his prize. Liam hadn't just died in the line of duty. He had been murdered by Marcus Thorn. The wound and the stakes fused into a single white-hot point of purpose. This was no longer about a boat or a secret technology, or even about his own healing. It was about justice for Liam. The man who had taken his best friend was now trying to take the last good thing in his life. The rage that had been simmering within him for years finally found its focus. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man who would use every skill that past had given him to hunt it down and hold it accountable. The first step was getting his dog back. The search for Shep became a hunt for Thorn. Elias, now fully inhabiting the persona he thought he'd left behind in the desert, began his preparations. The Zippo lighter was the first clue. It meant Thorn was using Aegis operatives, men who were trained but likely arrogant, underestimating their target. He analyzed the boot print and the scuff marks, determining the direction they had taken Shep, not toward the main road, but deeper into the state forest that bordered his property. Thorn wouldn't risk being seen. He'd have a secluded cabin or a temporary camp somewhere in the woods. Elias packed a small go-bag, water, a compass, a knife, the spool of high-tensile line he'd bought for the boat's rigging, and a pair of binoculars. He was moving on his own turf now. Every gully, every ridge, every game trail was a known quantity. He moved with a silence and speed that belied his years, his senses alive to the snap of a twig, the call of a bird. For hours he tracked them, his military training a second skin. He found a discarded tranquilizer dart, the kind used for large animals, and his fury intensified. They had drugged Shep. Late in the afternoon, from a ridge overlooking a secluded cove, he saw it. A small, isolated fishing lodge, a rental by the look of it. Thorn's expensive sedan was parked behind it, partially hidden by the trees. Two men, built like contractors, sat on the porch smoking, and chained to the porch railing, looking groggy but unharmed, was Shep. Relief washed over Elias, so potent it almost buckled his knees. But it was immediately followed by cold calculation. He couldn't go in hot. Two armed men plus Thorn, who was an unknown variable. He needed a plan. He needed to turn his environment into a weapon. He retreated back into the woods, his mind working, formulating a strategy. He would get Shep back and then he would set the real trap. He waited for nightfall. The two guards were lazy, confident in their isolation. He circled the lodge, noting the layout, the entry points, the generator that supplied their power. He found the main telephone line and severed it. Then, using a simple but effective technique, he created a diversion. He tied a length of his rigging line to a loose stack of firewood on the far side of the cabin, ran the line back to his position in the woods, and gave it a sharp tug. The woodpile collapsed with a loud clatter. As expected, both guards grabbed their weapons and moved to investigate, leaving the porch unguarded. Elias moved in, a ghost in the darkness. He approached Shep, who, despite his grogginess, recognized his scent and gave a weak thump of his tail. "Easy, boy. We're going home," Elias whispered, his knife making quick work of the rope they'd used to tie him. He unclipped the chain from the dog's collar. Shep, now free, leaned against him, a low whine of relief in his throat. Elias didn't wait. He and the dog melted back into the forest just as the guards realized they'd been duped. Back at his own property, the mission shifted. He wasn't running anymore. He was making his stand. He knew Thorn would come for him now, angry and personally. He wouldn't send his men alone this time. Elias had his own fortress, and he began to prepare it. The boat shed, the symbol of his healing, would become the centerpiece of his trap. He spent the next 24 hours in a fever of activity. He used his engineering skills, sharpened by the work on the boat, to rig a series of non-lethal defenses. A tripwire connected to a bucket of greasy engine sludge. A rope snare hidden in the rafters, designed to hoist a man off his feet. He rewired the shed's single overhead light to a hidden switch that only he knew. He took the heaviest sailcloth and created a dark, confusing maze inside the shed, channeling any intruder toward a specific point. The boat itself, the nearly completed wanderer, became the final piece of the puzzle. He positioned it in a way that created a blind spot, a perfect hiding place in the shadows of its hull. He placed Arthur's schematics, the prize Thorn was after, in a decoy box, booby-trapped with a simple but effective flashbang device he constructed from a camera flash and some magnesium shavings. The real journal and plans were hidden securely elsewhere. He was setting the stage, not for a firefight, but for a reckoning. He was turning Thorn's own tactics, deception, misdirection, and environmental control against him. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, a storm began to roll in off the Atlantic. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin. The stage was set. The actors were on their way. Elias sat in the darkness of the boat shed, Shep at his side, and waited. He was no longer the haunted veteran. He was the hunter. The storm broke with a theatrical fury, lashing the coast with wind and rain. The power flickered, then died, plunging the property into a primal darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. It was the perfect cover. Through the rain-streaked window of the shed, Elias saw the headlights of two vehicles cut through the night, stopping just short of his driveway. Thorn hadn't come alone. Doors opened and closed. 3 figures, clad in black rain gear, moved toward the cabin, their forms momentarily illuminated by a jagged fork of lightning. One was clearly Thorn, his movements stiff with anger. The other 2 were his Aegis muscle. They kicked in the cabin door, finding it empty. Elias watched, his heart a steady, cold drum. He had anticipated this. They would assume he was hiding, scared. They would underestimate him. After a few minutes, the 3 figures emerged from the cabin and started toward the boat shed, their flashlights cutting nervous beams through the deluge. This was it. Elias gave Shep's neck a final, reassuring squeeze. "Stay," he whispered. The dog, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained perfectly still in the shadows beneath the boat's hull. The shed door creaked open. Thorn entered first, flanked by his 2 thugs. "Vance!" Thorn's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Let's end this foolishness. Give me Pendleton's work, and I'll let you walk away." The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. One of the thugs swept his flashlight beam across the shed, catching the decoy box on the workbench. "Boss, over here." As the thug reached for the box, he snagged the tripwire. A wooden bucket, filled with thick, black engine sludge and grease, tipped from the rafters, dousing him completely. He slipped, cursing, his flashlight skittering across the floor. The second thug lunged forward, straight into the maze of sailcloth Elias had erected. Disoriented in the dark, he stumbled into the rope snare. Elias, positioned in the loft above, pulled the line taut. The man yelped as his feet were yanked from under him and he was hoisted upside down, dangling helplessly. 2 down. Thorn spun around, his own powerful flashlight piercing the darkness, searching for Elias. "Clever, Vance. Very clever. You can't hide forever." Elias hit the hidden switch. The single bare bulb overhead flickered on, momentarily blinding Thorn. In that instant, Elias dropped from the loft, landing silently behind him. "It's over, Thorn," Elias said, his voice low and steady. Thorn recovered quickly, turning, a pistol already in his hand. He was faster than Elias had anticipated. "Over?" he sneered, the beam of his flashlight catching Elias's face. "It was over for your friend Liam years ago. Did you really think that was an accident? He and his team were snooping where they didn't belong. They were a loose end. Just like you." The confession hung in the air, raw and venomous. It was everything Elias had suspected, but hearing it spoken with such casual cruelty was like a physical blow. This was the moment, the culmination of years of guilt and grief. But Thorn had the gun. He had the advantage. "I got the report on my desk," Thorn gloated, taking a step closer. "SEAL team ambushed. Tragic. The cost of doing business. I'm a patriot, Vance. That technology will secure our nation's future. A few dead soldiers is a small price to pay." He raised the pistol, centering it on Elias's chest. "And now you'll be the last payment on that account." But in his monologue, in his supreme arrogance, Thorn had forgotten the 4th player on the field. From the absolute darkness beneath the hull of the Wanderer, a silent shape exploded. Shep, a blur of focused fury, launched himself not at Thorn's gun hand, but at his legs. The dog's weight and momentum hit Thorn just below the knees, buckling his stance. Thorn cried out in surprise and pain as he crashed backward, his head hitting the solid mahogany of the boat's frame with a sickening thud. The pistol flew from his grasp, clattering across the concrete floor. Elias was on him in a second, securing Thorn's hands behind his back with a set of zip ties. Shep stood over the prone form of the man, a deep, menacing growl rumbling in his chest, a true and final guardian. The storm raged outside, but inside the boat shed, there was a sudden, profound quiet. It was finished. Justice, delivered in a fortress built by healing hands, with a hero whose loyalty had been the ultimate decisive weapon. In the aftermath, the arrival of the local sheriff and, eventually, federal agents felt like a distant epilogue. Elias's pre-timed call had worked perfectly. Thorn's confession, captured by a small digital recorder Elias had hidden in the rafters, was undeniable. Combined with Arthur Pendleton's journal and the corroborating evidence from the Aegis Dynamic Zippo, it was enough to unravel Thorn's entire criminal enterprise. The investigation into Aegis and the truth behind the Kandahar ambush was launched at the highest levels. The silent propulsion schematics were handed over to the Department of the Navy, not as a weapon, but as Arthur had intended, a tool for exploration and scientific advancement under strict ethical oversight. The government, in recognition of the technology's value and the circumstances of its recovery, established a significant finder's reward. But the money was never the point. Elias, with the help of a pro bono lawyer recommended by the agents, channeled every last dollar into creating a new foundation. He called it the Liam Pendleton Legacy. Its mission was twofold: to provide unwavering support for the families of fallen special operators, and to fund scholarships for young, ethical engineers who dreamed of building a better world, not just better weapons. It was a legacy of honor, born from tragedy and forged in redemption. With the legal battles over and the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest, Elias returned to the one thing that felt true: the work. He finished The Wanderer. The last plank was laid, the final coat of varnish applied until the mahogany glowed with a deep, liquid fire. He stepped the mast, rigged the sails, and installed a small, quiet diesel engine for emergencies, a nod to practicality. The boat was perfect, a gleaming testament to second chances. The day of the launch was bright and clear, the storm a distant memory. The small community of Port Blossom came out to watch. Mary from the hardware store brought a bottle of champagne. The fishermen from the docks offered knowing smiles and helping hands. Elias was no longer the town hermit. He was one of them. He had rebuilt his life in the same way he had rebuilt the boat, piece by piece, with patience, dedication, and an unwavering sense of purpose. He christened the boat not the Wanderer, but the Guardian, as the boat slid from its cradle into the cool, clear waters of the Atlantic. Elias stood on the deck, his hand resting on Shep's head. The dog looked up at him, his old, wise eyes full of a quiet understanding. They had done it, together. He steered the boat out of the harbor, the sails catching the wind with a satisfying snap. He was not sailing away from his past anymore. He was sailing toward a future he had earned, carrying the memory of his friend not as a burden of guilt, but as a beacon of honor. Out on the open water, with the coastline shrinking behind him and the endless blue horizon ahead, Elias Vance finally felt the warmth of the sun on his face and knew, for the first time in a very long time, that he was truly home. The story of Elias and Shep is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds are often the gateway to our greatest purpose. It teaches us that loyalty isn't just a feeling but an action, a steadfast presence that can guide us through the darkest of nights. True healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to honor it, transforming pain into a legacy of hope and service for others. It shows that sometimes, the most profound redemption can be found in the simple, honest work of building something new from the wreckage of what was lost. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it resonated with you, we would be so grateful if you would like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Your support allows us to keep telling these stories. Please, leave a comment below and tell us what part of Elias's journey moved you the most. We read every single one. And be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you there.